On behalf of the Gerontology Department and the Gerontology Institute of the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, I welcome you to our forum today that we call Questions and Answers on Social Security Reform. I'm Bing Chen. I'm the Frank J. Manning Eminent Scholars Chair in Gerontology at this university. I am very pleased to see all of you here. I frankly had expected fewer people because we're faced with fierce competition in town. And I commend you for forsaking the opportunity of being somewhere else to be here. The premise of, we should have tested this before. This is the only non-professional part of this afternoon. The rest of it will be professional. The premise for this particular forum is that people need a lot of questions answered when evaluating reform proposals for Social Security. In the last few months, we've had a lot of press coverage on reforming Social Security. A lot of it is informative, but some of it actually has not been, in our view. We needed more information, accurate information. We need more facts, accurate facts. We need presentations of these facts in a neutral and objective way. We haven't gotten all of that in what we've been able to observe in the print and electronic media. A lot of it, as I said, has been very good presentations, but some of it has created confusion. There are some press colleagues here, and all of you have not committed that problem. Others who are not here today may have. I'll give you just one Sunday morning news program a couple months ago as an example. This was conducted by an award-winning national journalist. I shall not mention the name of the program, but the substance is completely true. Because I watched it, I took notes. Point number one, the moderator said that President Roosevelt was really a smart guy when he set the retirement age at 65 for Social Security benefits. Because in those days, people didn't live that long. And he said that the lucky ones who lived long enough to get Social Security, they would get for a few months and die. Now I thought to myself, this is a case where he did not know about the difference between life expectancy at birth and life expectancy at age 65. Even though in those ancient times, which wasn't that ancient, 1935, once you reached age 65, the remaining number of years on average was 12 and a half years. It's not a few months and you'll die once you get Social Security. Then on the same program, a guest on the program who was a one-time cabinet member and now a college professor. He's not on this campus, at this university. He was responding to a question about retirement age postponement. So he said, well, under current law, the retirement age has already been pushed up to 68. Now we know that's not true. Under current law, retirement age will be pushed back to 67 by 2027, which is 22 years from now. Then on the same program, the lead, one of the questions that the host was addressing was in 12 or 13 years, the Social Security program would be taking in less money or in taxes, less taxes than paying out in benefits. So therefore, there is a shortage in 12 or 13 years. He just chose not to mention that there is this trust fund which has money in it, because since 1984, we've been building up this trust fund. Now it stands at about $1.7 trillion. Now, speaking of trust funds, there is a lot of confusion also. Is it real or is it fictional? Now, I'm not here to rebut these arguments or point out some differences in facts. My point really is that we could argue for reforming Social Security without, I emphasize, resorting to facts and figures that are not correct. So that's why we're very pleased that you're here, and your questions actually will make up the conference, this meeting. We have an answer man here for you. The Chief Actuary of Social Security is not a political appointee. He is a civil servant, and I'll have our moderator introduce him. But rest assured that we're not here to be for or against any particular idea to reform Social Security. All we are interested in are the facts, accurate facts, objective analysis, and neutral analysis. As I said, we appreciate your being here, and I would add my personal appreciation to that. And the extent to which I'm appreciative, you should know about by the following story. It's not a very funny story, but it is a story of true fact. I invited an acquaintance to this conference. I gave him this poster, and he said, "You're having somebody from Social Security. You're going to push one of the administration's plans?" I said, "No. He's a civil servant. He's not out pushing for the administration's point of view." And then he said, "I noticed that this forum is designated as an official 2005 White House Conference on Aging event. Now, are you sponsored or sanctioned by the White House?" My answer was no. The White House Conference happens or is convened once every 10 years. And it so happens 2005, another one is coming up in October. And a special event such as an official designation is a way that historically by the conference, used by the conference to highlight or showcase some important or useful independently organized aging event or event on aging. So he was pretty much assured and reassured, and He said, well, okay, let me see. When is that? I said, April 11th. He said, April 11th, that's the Red Sox opener, home opener. I don't care who is coming in town. So that'll put you in the right place. Not even the president. So he's over there now at Fenway Park. But I told him, you know, we end at 3, and that opener begins at 3:05. You can make it that way. But anyway, so much for the purpose of this and the apolitical nature of our meeting. Once we got the speaker, our next challenge was to find a moderator. And we wanted a moderator who has real experience, a veteran moderator, journalist, television journalist, and we wanted her to be very active, very in tune with public affairs about important issues of the day. And we wanted her to have some affiliation with academic institutions. And in a manner of speaking, we put these variables into our imaginary computer, and guess what? Out came the name of Margie Reedy. And ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce to you an old friend whom I just met today. I said she's an old friend because when she was an anchor for the NBC affiliate WHDH, Channel 7 for 4 years, I was here, and every time I could help it, I would watch her news program. She has been a television journalist for 25 years. She must have started when she's 13 or 15. And she's worked in Boston, Detroit, and Austin, Texas. As I mentioned, she was a main anchor for Channel 7 for 4 years. And after that, she went over to New England Cable News, where she hosted award-winning Newsnight program for 7 years. And during those 7 years, she moderated on Newsnight programs in the field of medicine and politics and law and many other current issues, important issues of the day. And then, most recently, she had a fellowship at the Harvard's Kennedy School at the Shorenstein Center for the Press, Politics, and Public Policy. And she produced a documentary, a very regarded documentary, about how 3 cable networks competed or battled to cover the war in Iraq, and how 3 different approaches they took. And appropriately and very aptly, the documentary was titled Cable News Goes to War, to cover the war and also a war among themselves, in a manner of speaking, because they were competing for that. And in a few months this fall, she'll begin her teaching position at Tufts University at the School of University College of Citizenship and Public Service in nearby Tufts University. It's my great honor to present to you Margie Reedy, our moderator.
Thank you very much. I'm going to apologize immediately for my voice. I'm going to try and speak softly. I'm not trying to be sexy, because when this thing goes out, I'm going to sound like Minnie Mouse. So please bear with me if you will. But I wanted very much to be here today, having spoken with Bing many times and talked about what we were doing today. Now, there's nothing worse as a news person to follow a long catalog of all the media sins in regard to Social Security and its coverage. But what are you going to do? One of the drawbacks of being a former talk show host on television is you tend to look at life as a giant booking. And I have to admit, Social Security doesn't get the kind of coverage it should get because, people just want to cover sort of the horse race aspect of it as they do elections. As producers would look at this subject, they say, it's not sexy enough, there's not enough passion about this, too many numbers, all that sort of thing. But wait, when you look around the country, you hear a movement afoot. My 22-year-old daughter is a senior at Reed College out in Oregon, and they just had a speaker come and talk about Social Security, and so she sort of said, well, I should go hear this. But she said, you know what, this got very passionate because a lot of the students were speaking or were listening to this congressman who had come to speak and saying that they really want something for them to be there when they reach retirement age, and especially after a lifetime of paying into the system. So how many issues can claim to bring together the AARP and rock the vote? Pretty broad spectrum. But the seniors lobby and the MTV effort to politically organize young people are moving together on this one, if you can believe it or not. Probably makes some sense because a lot of the aging rockers that the baby boomers listen to are now about ready to get Social Security, so it all kind of works together. But both age groups want to make sure that they have their piece of the Social Security pie when they get to this point. But Social Security not only brings these two groups together, it may pit them against each other, the eventual needs of the young against the immediate needs of the old. Not to mention rich against poor. Should well-to-do retirees get the benefits that they have paid into, even if they have paid into the system? And what about benefit cuts? The average Social Security check is $872 a month. Can people live on less if they need to? Also, there's the putting business people against workers. How much money should be taken out of your weekly paycheck to fund the national security net? And if that tax goes up, will Americans continue to be competitive with each other and with competitive with countries all over the globe that are facing many of the same issues? The pressure is building as 77 million baby boomers, that post-war bulge of children born between 1946 and 64, are racing toward retirement. And as that happens, the president and his representatives are racing all over the country, making 60 stops in 60 days. It's a multi-million-dollar effort to wake the nation to the coming shortfall and also to push his plan to fix it. President Bush is proposing the creation of private investment accounts to allow individuals to take 4% of the money they would receive in Social Security payments in the future and invest it now in a specific list of stocks and bonds. A bold change to the 60-year-old program, some say, that will let lower-income Americans actually build some assets. A risky step that will take more money out of a program already looking at serious shortfall, say others. But this just in, word from the White House is that even as the president continues his road trip, the president's going to switch course very soon. Mr. Bush seems to be losing some Senate Republicans on privatization, and he never has had the Democrats. So he may have to put aside his idea of private accounts, at least for now, in an effort to reach some sort of bipartisan agreement on the future of the safety net. So the president and congressional leaders may in fact start laying out a menu of potentially painful solutions to the country. So this is a great story, all right, but it's not all it is. It's our lives, and it's our futures, and the futures of our children and our parents. So it's time to decide how to move forward. Many Americans are so confused about Social Security because there are so many numbers floating out there about when the system might run out of money and what kind of shape it is in. And when you're talking about billions and trillions of dollars, it's all pretty overwhelming. So there has also been more than a little political obfuscation on all sides of this. So today we are going to cut through the politics and get to the source. Stephen Goss is the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration. And he's here to give us the background of the social program that has changed the country and to tell us where we are today. And it says right in his bio that he openly and forthrightly invites suggestions and criticisms. So after he speaks, we're going to welcome your questions. But his talk today will be informational. Again, it's not political. Unless you think Mr. Goss has been recently appointed under some Republican or some Democrat, he has been with the Social Security Administration for more than 30 years. Among many other achievements, Mr. Goss has been a staff participant representing the Office of the Actuary at the President's Commission at Pension Policy. He's also worked with the National Commission on Social Security Reform, in addition to many other task forces and intergovernmental groups in the field of social insurance, health insurance, and long-term insurance. He is currently serving on the National Academy of Social Insurance, studying uncharted waters, paying benefits from individual accounts in federal retirement policy. Please welcome Stephen Goss.
Thank you, Bing, and well, sorry about that. Thank you, Margie, and thank you, Bing. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. And let me just sort of reiterate the sort of disclaimer business. I am a career employee at Social Security Administration. Let me just tell you very briefly about our little Office of the Actuary. We have 50 people that work in the Office of the Actuary. We do all the actuarial projection work. By the way, you know, when I applied for this job, I didn't know what an actuary was. I ended up applying for it really kind of by accident. People in the placement office at the university I was at swapped me out of another job that I was applying for and put me into this because they saw it needed a math background. So I learned what an actuary was when I actually was interviewing for the job. You all know what an actuary is? You're way ahead of where I was 32 years ago, I hope. Well, an actuary is sort of like an accountant, except an actuary is much more fun. Accountants look backwards at sort of what's happened. We get to try to make these crazy guesses about what's going to happen in the future. And believe me, that's really a whole lot more fun. At least we think so. So I've been at Social Security since 1973. I've been working in the Office of the Actuary ever since. Our office is completely apolitical. We have no political appointees in our office. And while we're in the executive branch of the government and we work for the Social Security Administration, we also work directly for the Congress. Any member of Congress that has any questions, that has a proposal that they're interested in getting estimates for, they come directly to us. We work with them on a confidential basis. These are both Republicans and Democrats. We sort of work it both ways. And we've had some mention about the real event of today here in Boston, which is the Red Sox over at Fenway Park, the new world champions of baseball, right? But the actuaries think of them as being sort of like the umpire behind the plate. We're not rooting for the Yankees or the Boston Red Sox, although of course we would root for the Red Sox between those two. But we're just behind the plate, trying to call balls and strikes, and really not political at all. And I am absolutely not here trying to put forth anybody's proposition for how to fix Social Security. What I am here to try to do is to share with you really three things. Sort of a brief sort of historical look at a couple of the aspects of how Social Security has developed over the past several decades. And then secondly, what the financial status of Social Security really is, what we're really faced with in terms of making sure that there will be enough money coming in to pay the benefits that are scheduled to be paid out for all of us in this room and for our kids and our grandkids. And then a third item is just to mention a little bit about some of the kinds of things that people have thought of and are under consideration for possible changes going forward in the future. I assume we have for this PowerPoint thing, oh great, if you just flip to the first slide please. Well, first of all, there's a beginning to everything. And there was a beginning, as Margie and Bing were suggesting, to Social Security. Back when FDR, back in 35, said, let's have a national pension. And today, Social Security is the national pension for virtually all Americans. Well over 95% of Americans will eventually be eligible for a Social Security benefit of one type or another. So it's the deal. While 1935 it was enacted into law in the middle of the Great Depression, the payroll taxes that people had to pay into it first started up in 1937, and we can look back longingly at those days. It was 1% for the employer and 1% for the employee that they paid in initially, and that existed from 1937 all the way up until 1950. So it stayed at a relatively low level of tax rate for a long time. And it was only paid on earnings up to $3,000. Now, people didn't make as much back then, so $3,000 was a lot of money. Didn't change until 1950. Next slide, please. Well, if people started paying in 1937, when did benefits start? Well, in the first 3 years, 1937 through 1939, there were no monthly benefits of the type that we're used to seeing now. What was paid out is if people paid in money while they were working in 1937, 8, or 9, and they died somewhere in that time frame, they got return of what they'd put in. So they at least got sort of return of their contributions. But in 1940, that was really the start of the benefit structure. And in 1940, we started having retired worker benefits, and spouse benefits, and widow benefits. And all of these started basically at age 65, which was the original retirement age. Monthly benefits started out at that time, and the key thing to remember about when Social Security first started out, why the tax rate could be so very low back in those days. I mean, you might ask, well, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had only 1% employer-employee each now instead of 6.2% each? But the reason it was able to start at a very low level is to get benefits starting out in 1940, these monthly benefits, you had to have a certain amount of work in those 3 years, 1937, 38, 39. Now, how many people do you think in 1940 who were 75 or 80 or 85 years old had a substantial amount of work activity in 1937, 8, and 9? Not very many. So as a result, we only really had just the youngest of the aged population were actually able to get a benefit starting in 1940. In fact, in 1940, during that whole year, only about 200,000, roughly 222,000 people were able to get a benefit. That's compared to 35 million people who are actually paying into the system, because we started levying taxes on virtually everybody. Well, if you're levying taxes on all the workers but giving benefits to only a few people, and you're operating a system and basically this sort of, the money that's coming in we're going to pay out for benefits, you're doing it on this pay-as-you-go kind of basis, current cost financing basis, you don't have to charge very much initially in order to pay for the benefits. And that's really where the system started. Now, over time, we've continued to have taxes paid in by all the workers, essentially. But, if you next slide, please. But what has happened is that the numbers of beneficiaries have been rising. Well, as you can imagine, if you're going to be having the money coming in from today's taxes pay for today's benefits, and you have a bigger and bigger portion of the aged population able to get a benefit because they will have had earnings since 1937, your tax rates are going to have to go up over time. So there's no big secret or big surprise about why the tax rates have risen over time. It's really a matter of the program sort of maturing. And you can see in 1950, we had an increase up to 1.5% each for employers and employees, and this is strung out. I haven't put in all the little increases that occurred. There were a number of them over the years. But in 1990, we had our last payroll tax increase to 6.2% for employers and employees each. That's where we're at now. You can see at that time in 1990, you paid 6.2% employer-employee each up to $51,000 of earnings. Well, that amount, that taxable maximum, gets indexed over time to rise at about the same rate as the average wage in the economy. And so it's up to about $90,000 now is the limit. Next slide, please. Well, we've had to increase the taxes over time. Why? Because the benefits have been expanding. Among many of the things that have happened to cause benefits to expand in Social Security, one of which a lot of people in this room will remember, is back in 1956 there was a substantial expansion in benefit types that were available from Social Security. That was when the disability program was enacted into law. Prior to that, it was only these old age benefits and some survivor benefits, but disability benefits became available actually in 1957, and that resulted in a substantial increase in the number of people who could get benefits, and obviously for a very important reason, for people who are just unable to continue to work. Social Security is always put forth as a method for replacing lost income for people who became old and were no longer able to or needing to work because Social Security was there for them, or because there was a death in the family of a worker, or because of disability of a worker. Now, by 1975, the program really had pretty much matured. We'd gotten to the point where we'd not only been taxing all the workers for a long time, but now we had basically all the people who were up to even 75, 85, 95 years old had been around long enough so that they had had enough work activity to be able to get a benefit. At that time, we had 31 million beneficiaries and 100 million workers who were contributing. The math looks a little bit stranger. You're thinking, how can it be 3.2 workers per beneficiary? It's rounding. What can I say? But at that time, we had about 3.2 workers for every beneficiary back in 1975. Today, we have 3.3 workers for every beneficiary. So this little ratio of workers to beneficiary that you heard talk about a lot has actually been extremely stable since 1975 at the current level. And 1975 is essentially the year in which we actually had the program mature. I've got a couple little graphs here that will actually help sort of illustrate what's going on. Flip the next slide, please. The next slide really kind of shows in a picture about how the numbers of beneficiaries, or maybe better put, the percentage of the aged population, the percentage of the population in 62 and over that was receiving a Social Security old age or survivor's benefit. You can see back in 1940 there was almost nobody, very small percentage, because you had to have some work in those 3 years, 37 through 9, and not many people did. But you can see as we approach out towards 1975, this graph is getting up there up into the 90% territory, and it took that long for us to reach the point where all of the aged population, all the way up to 80 and 90 years old, had been around long enough and had been contributing to Social Security to become insured and eligible to receive a benefit. So I just suggest this by way of being a little bit careful. You sometimes hear of things about worker to beneficiary ratios of 41 to 1 back in 1945 or something, or 16 to 1 or 8 to 1. Those high ratios of workers to beneficiaries were back at a time when the program really wasn't mature yet. Those are not really indicative of what is happening to the program as a result of demographic shifts. And we'll get to that in a minute, because that is really sort of where it's at for the future. If we flip to the next slide, you'll see sort of a similar picture. Oh, I'm sorry. Could we go back one? Didn't realize we'd already. Okay, this slide is sort of what it looks like the beneficiaries under the disability insurance program. And it also matured roughly about 1975. Remember, it started in 1957. It took a number of years for people who were disabled in the society to have become disabled long enough ago so that they had an opportunity to be contributing. In 1957, when we first started out, there were a lot of people who had been disabled for 10 or 15 years and were not yet eligible or insured for disability insurance benefits. But by the time we got to 1975, we'd really gotten this program matured, and you can see we were up to basically about the same percentage of beneficiaries that we'll have going into the future. And if we flip to the next slide, please. The next slide is a little bit different look. This actually shows something that we all are maybe even more interested in, which is the actual sort of level of the benefit that's provided by Social Security. And this sort of wiggly kind of graph here, if you look at the heavy solid line in between, that heavy solid line in between is something referred to as the benefit replacement rate. And remember, Social Security is about replacing lost earnings. So the benefit replacement rate is really just the size of the benefit as a percentage of what the person's career average earnings level had been. And the heavy middle line is sort of for a person about in the middle of the earnings spectrum, right around sort of the average worker. And you can see it started out at about 20% of the career earnings level is what Social Security provided. And gradually it increased over time. It reached a peak back around 1980 for 65-year-old retirees. And you can see what unsustainable looks like, because if you see this curve, it's going up like crazy approaching 1980. This benefit replacement rate was going up very rapidly, and the reason it was going up so rapidly is because you might recall hearing this talk about the double-indexed benefit tables we had back then. We actually had benefit tables that had not been put together in quite the right way. Blame the actuaries if you like, but what the heck? You know, they were not put together in quite the right way, and benefits from one generation to the next, back in the late 70s, were rising not only at the average rate of growth in the wage in the economy, but on top of that, also the average rate of growth in prices in the economy. And the sort of double growth that was going on was really just something that wasn't sustainable. And in 1977, there were amendments passed that fixed that. It changed the benefit formula so that the benefit levels from one generation to the next would tend to grow at about the same rate of growth as the average wage for workers in the economy. Now, there was a little bit of a transition. The Congress back in 1977, when they saw that benefit levels had gotten so very high, at that little peak around the 1980 level, they said, this is higher than was intended when these benefit tables were first put into effect back in 1972. So they actually ratcheted down the level of benefits a little bit before they sort of pushed it towards stability. And there are probably some in this room who remember things called the notch. and notch babies, and we have nobody in this room who is anywhere near old enough to be one of those folks. But there was this talk about the notch, and the notch was something that occurred because the Congress said benefit levels got to be higher than were really intended by the Congress. Let's bring them down a little bit, about 5 or 6%, back to a lower level. And that's where you see between about 1980 and 1990, this line is fairly flat. But remember, we also had another set of amendments to Social Security in 1983 that, among other things, changed the retirement age. We've already had 1 full year's increase in the retirement age from 65 up to 66 already occur. That phased in between 2000 and 2005. And you can see sort of the little dip down that's between about 2000 and 2005 that's going on here. That's basically the effect on the benefit level replacement rate for a 65-year-old retiree of having that first year of retirement age phase in. And you see another little place where this line is going down a bit between about 2015 and 2020. That's when the second year of increase in the retirement age will be phasing in. That's that which was enacted back in 1983. And now thereafter, you can see under current law, this benefit formula is projected to sort of give kind of a flat line to this benefit replacement rate. That's when you hear this talk about the wage-indexed benefit levels under Social Security. This is what it looks like. It's supposed to give sort of this flat benefit replacement rate after you've made adjustments for things like changes in retirement age. Okay, so this is really sort of what got us to where we're at. This is the benefit formula that we've got now going forward. And the question is, so what's the problem? And if we go to the next slide, you will see really the basis for what's the problem going forward. And the problem going forward, I mean, we all talk about the baby boom generation, and in a sense, the baby boom kind of is the problem, but it's not the way we usually think about it. The baby boom, there's a lot of them. And they're going to retire, and they're going to cost money. They're going to cost money to private pensions as well as to Social Security. But the real problem with the baby boom is that it didn't keep on going. The baby boom generation, during that period in which they were born, the average birth rate was 3.3 kids per woman throughout her whole lifetime. Well, if we had stayed with the birth rates being at 3.3, something like that, children born for each woman throughout her whole sort of, childbearing lifetime, we wouldn't be talking about Social Security having trouble right now, looking forward into the future, with a 12.4% tax rate. 12.4% would be fine. It would be plenty enough of a tax rate to cover Social Security's costs at current benefit levels with a 3.3 birth rate. What did happen was at the end of the baby boom, which the last year of which is usually thought to be 1965, and the 7 years after that, leading up to 1972, the birth rate dropped. And we all know, some reasons. Kids were no longer seen as an economic asset. Anybody who's paying for a kid going through college knows all about that. They're not helping us out as farm hands anymore. So, the world has changed a little bit. Kids cost money, and people aren't having as many of them. On the plus side also, infant mortality rates are much lower, so people don't have to give birth to as many children. So birth rates dropped, and they dropped a lot. They dropped from 3.3 during the baby boom era down to just 2 by 1972. And as you can see by this line, we've basically stayed about a 2.0 fertility rate since. So on average, women in our society in the U.S. are only having about 2 kids during their lifetime. Now, before we get too worried about that, think of poor Japan and Western Europe and even Canada. Their birth rates are way lower than ours. So we've got it easy compared to them. Japan, it's something like 1.2 children per woman. Much of Western Europe, it's in the 1.2 to 1.4 range. So if we think we've got trouble coming up because of the low birth rates, those guys are really facing tough stuff. But the key here is what happened with the birth rates is we were at a much higher level in the past. And even before the baby boom generation, on average, birth rates were something like 3 children per woman. But now we've dropped down to a lower level. And the key is we've had a shift down to a lower level. The birth rates, we don't think, are going to continue to keep going down. They're going to stay at about 2 children per woman. And if they do, that means that we're going to have a level shift in some other things. Like, if we flip to the next slide, you can see, again, this talk I mentioned earlier about this ratio of workers to beneficiaries, which you've all heard about, 3.3 workers to beneficiaries right now. And you can see on this, after 1975, the point at which the program had matured, it's to the right of 1975 where this worker to beneficiary ratio is really showing you what's happening as a result of changes in the population. Shifts because of people, living longer, shifts because of changes in birth rates. And the real issue here is that you can see that this line stayed very flat and will stay flat out until about the year 2010. And then we have about a 20-year period where it just drops, and it drops quite rapidly. And the reason for the drop isn't because of the baby boom per se. It isn't because of people living longer. It's really because of the birth rates. If we had continued to have, again, 3 or 3.3 kids per woman in our country, we would not have had the shift down to a lower level on this worker to beneficiary ratio. So we will be shifting as a result of the lower birth rates, unless suddenly it turns around or we have massive immigration increases. We're going to be shifting down to the lower level from 3.3 down to about a 2.0 number of workers per beneficiary. This is probably as close to a fact as we can get for something about the future. The future is always iffy, but this is about as close as it gets, unless, again, we have some massive changes. Now, keep in mind the way this picture looks. We've been at this plateau of the worker-to-beneficiary ratio, and we're going to, over a 20-year period between 2010 and 2030, shift down to a lower level for this worker-to-beneficiary ratio. And on the next slide, you will see something that happens right in concert with that. This little slide is just a look at the solid line in the middle is the cost of paying Social Security scheduled benefits divided by our tax base, divided by all the earnings that we have taxable by wage earners and by self-employed workers. And so you can see, in effect, this tells you what is the tax rate we would have to charge all those people for all their earnings below the taxable maximum in order to just pay for all the benefits that are scheduled in current law. And you can see right now, actually, the tax rate we need is less than the 12.4% tax rate we have in place. And that's why, of course, the trust funds are building up now. We have more money coming in than we actually need to spend right now. And that's because, of course, the baby boomers are still in the workforce. They haven't yet shifted out into becoming aged. But between 2010 and 2030, you see there's a shift in this cost as a percentage of our tax base. It's going to go from below our income rate up to above. And it's just a very direct shift. And the reason for the shift, again, really is because of the drop on the birth rates. If we had not had the drop on the birth rates from 3.3 down to 2.0, this cost rate would stay down there at a level below 12.4. We could actually lower our tax rate a little bit. We could go down to probably 11.5% payroll tax rate. So, life is full of choices. In a society, we made a choice to have fewer kids. And that means that we'll have to make other adjustments as a result. Okay, if we flip to the next chart, you'll see what happens to Social Security's trust funds as a result of this changeover from having the cost being less than the amount of money we have coming in taxes. And during that period, you see the trust fund level is going up. This little picture shows you the trust fund level, the amount of reserves we have in the Social Security trust funds as a percentage of the annual cost of the program, sort of how many years' worth of benefits we have in reserve at any given time. And right now, we're at about 3 years' worth of the cost of the program in reserves. And we're continuing to be rising up a little bit longer, out through 2010 or a little bit further, because between now and about 2017, we will still have more tax money coming in than we're going to be paying out in benefits. Well, the extra money goes into the trust funds, and we keep building it up. After 2017, we will start, in fact, to have more benefits paid under the current law schedule than we have taxes coming in. So, of course, that means we'll have to start dipping into the trust funds and spending some of the trust fund money to add to the taxes coming in to pay the full scheduled benefits. Well, that's great as long as it lasts, but you can see what happens is out in the year 2041 in our current projections, in the most recent trustees report, we project that we will have run out of trust fund drawing power to add to the taxes, and we will no longer be able to pay, if Congress does nothing between now and then, which is unbelievable, but if nothing were to happen between now and then, around 2041, we would run out of money in the trust funds. We wouldn't be able to augment our taxes to pay full scheduled benefits. And what would we do? Well, under current law, what we would do is the then commissioner would be constrained to say, I've only got 74 cents coming in for every dollar of benefit that's scheduled. I've got to do something about that. Either pays people 74 cents on a dollar, or pay people's benefits a month late, maybe later on 2 months late, to wait for enough money to build up in the trust funds. Lots of tough decisions. Now, you can be sure, absolutely sure, of few things in life, but one thing you can be sure of, that this isn't going to happen, because those 535 members of Congress are not going to allow the Social Security trust funds to run out of money and then have a sudden benefit cut, because if they did, there are going to be 535 new unemployed people very soon thereafter. So you can be sure that they'll do something well before that time. The question is what and when and exactly, how are they going to change this? But the bottom line is if things go as we project, we will exhaust the trust funds. That does not mean mean the end of Social Security by any means. It just means that we will no longer have reserves to draw on to augment the taxes, and we will then be able to pay only about 3/4 of the level of benefits that are scheduled now. If this were to continue on even beyond that, we project by the end of 75 years that we'd have about 68%, a little bit over 2/3 of the money coming in and then current taxes to be able to pay the scheduled benefits. So if we flip to the next slide, what does this really tell us? Well, it tells us that as a nation, as a Congress, as all of us, we have a choice. We have a choice. We can either raise the scheduled revenue for Social Security, go to a higher 12.4% tax rate, or there are many other ways you can increase the taxable maximum, lots of possibilities. We could lower the scheduled benefits under Social Security, and as you just saw, if we don't do anything, that will kind of happen automatically. We won't be able to pay all the benefits, so we'll pay less than what is scheduled under current law. Another possibility that's actually pretty close to the second one is to raise the retirement age under Social Security. Now, we already have 2 little hits of that happening, one just finished, and another one happening between 2017 and 2022 is being indicated, but there could be further increases in that. And there's something arguably natural about raising the retirement age if you believe that people are not only going to be living longer in the future, but also living healthier and living more capable. Let's face it, 65-year-olds today in general are more vital or more able, more capable than 65-year-olds 20, 30, 40 years ago. And just imagine the 65-year-olds 20, 30, 40 years from now. In all likelihood, they're going to be more capable. And in all likelihood, will probably be more active and will actually be interested in possibly working for a longer period of time. Maybe, maybe not. But we'll see. But you can see that if people did work for a longer period of time, not only would that bring more money into Social Security, but it would actually shift that ratio of workers to beneficiaries. If we change the retirement age, people work to a higher age and then started receiving benefits somewhat later, and if this happens sort of naturally because people are living longer and living healthier, that could actually change this worker to beneficiary ratio and we wouldn't have to raise the tax rate as much. So bottom line is, we're going to have to do one of these 3 things or 2 of these 3 things or all 3 of these 3 things going forward, because the shift in our population because of the change in the birth rates is simply means that the arithmetic is very, very clear. 12.4% tax rate just isn't going to be enough eventually to be able to pay for the level of benefits that Congress has scheduled in current law. So we're going to have to make some changes one way or the other. There are clearly, you've heard lots of talk about, should we do something right away? Should we do something relatively soon? What our office, the actuary, suggests is that there are some advantages to do something relatively soon. I mean, it doesn't have to be last year or next year or whatever, but doing things relatively soon does have some advantages with which you all would be very familiar. And that is if you enact something into law that will be a change that will be a phasing in over some period of time in the future, you can give people more advance notice, which is a good thing. Remember the increase in the retirement age that started in the year 2000? That was enacted into law in 1983. People had 17 years of advance notice to be able to start changing their plans and plan for an increase in retirement age. Advance notice is a good thing. So if we were to enact something today or next year or the year after or the year after, that would start to have effect out in 2020, 2030, 2040, we'd give people plenty of advance notice, and that'd be nice. Another reason to enact something relatively soon would be that you can make the change more gradual. You can phase it in more gradually, so that's a plus. And in addition, if you consider what the issues are, as we think we can lay them out fairly straightforwardly here, then you have actually more options available to consider if you do something relatively soon, as opposed to waiting until 2040 when we're going to run out of money in 2041. You'd have very, very limited options. Clearly, the Congress will, we hope, act well before 2040, and they'll act in a timely fashion. We flip to the next slide. Let me just sort of indicate very, very briefly, mentioned these already, just to give you sort of some sense of the kinds of changes that have actually occurred in the past. Again, probably a lot of you are familiar with these. The last 2 sets of major amendments to Social Security were in 1977 and 1983. And in 1977, there was a very, very interesting change, because remember I mentioned earlier about those benefit replacement rates that were shooting way up? And that was recognized as being something that really we could not continue, that the benefits would have gone to a level where we would have been taxing 100% tax rates on workers' pay, and you obviously can't do that. So something had to be done, and it was done. At the time, our projections were that the size of the shortfall over 75 years was something more than 3 times the size of the deficit that we have over the next 75 years projected today. So back in 1977, we had really a big problem facing us. Congress stepped up, they made changes, and they made really rather dramatic changes in the benefit formulas that took away this double indexing of the benefits and brought it back down to the wage indexing. So they stepped up, they did a good job, they increased some tax rates at the same time. In 1983 amendments, because not the complete job was done in 1977. They fixed about 2/3 of the problem. They still left some of it to be taken care of. And in the 1983 amendments, just 6 years later, we had some more things done, one of which was the increasing the retirement age. They advanced some of the tax rates to a little bit earlier. And they did some good things by way of changing Social Security enough so that we had a 75-year projection going forward from that point of Social Security being in good financial shape. Now, while Social Security was expected to be in good shape for 75 years, you remember that little curve we had before about that trust fund going up and then going back down again? That's not the ideal picture that we'd like to see. We'd rather see the trust fund sort of going up, but if it comes down, not go all the way down to zero and run out of money. We'd like to see the trust fund stabilizing at some point to sort of a level or a slight increase over time. That's what real sort of sustainable solvency looks like. And we've actually formalized in the last 10 years kind of criterion that we've talked to members of Congress about when they develop their plans of saying, you know, be aware that there are two things you might want to do here. One is to get Social Security to be solvent for 75 years, and the other is to make it what we call sustainably solvent. And sustainably solvent to us looks like having that trust fund ratio stable or slightly rising at the end. That means, frankly, that we would expect that solvency for Social Security would exist as far as the eye can see for the foreseeable future. And I'm very, very happy to report to you that all the members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that we've been dealing with for the last 10 years, commissions we've dealt with, have all taken this very much to heart. And virtually every proposal that we've worked on has worked towards a solution that would not only fix Social Security for 75 years, but put it on a sort of a stable financing basis for going to the future. So we won't have this sort of going up and then dropping down towards the end of the period. So I think we've made some real progress in how we look at this, about how we convey these issues to Congress, and they're doing what will be hopefully a much better job when we get to the next set of amendments, whenever that may be. We flip to the next slide. So the next changes. The next changes, as I mentioned, we're hoping, we're expecting that we really will be having stable trust fund levels towards the end of the 75-year period. And basically what that means is that we won't 5 or 10 or 15 years after those amendments be faced with the issue of coming back and saying, oh my gosh, Social Security is going down again, where we've got big problems ahead. The most that would be necessary would be maybe some minor tinkering in case the economy doesn't turn out quite as well as expected. So if we look to the next slide, I actually listed here just a couple of the items, and there are just dozens of these literally. A couple of the kinds of little pieces that you might think of in putting together to develop the next real Social Security reform, to develop the changes that can get that cost and the income back closer together and give us a sustainable sort of financing structure for Social Security. And one of the things I already mentioned was to have the retirement age go up somewhat more. And you can make a case for this if, again, you believe that not only will we all be living longer, but we'll be living healthier and more capable. And if you don't like retirement age, that's okay. There's another way that we could lower the cost of the system. That's just simply to lower the benefit levels. That's certainly a possibility. Now, there's a lot of similarity here because, as a lot of you know, if you raise the normal retirement age, that age which was 65, it's now 66, it'll be going to 67, you can still get a benefit at age 65 or at 62. It's just the percentage of the basic benefit level, this thing called the primary insurance amount, that sort of crazy computation of a basic benefit level. You get a smaller percentage of that if you retire at 62. Once we go up to a 67 normal retirement age than you would have when we had a 65 normal retirement age. You only get 70% of it instead of getting 80% of it. So increasing the retirement age, in effect, is a way really of sort of lowering the benefit levels. We can either do it through changing the retirement age or just directly changing the formulas to lower the benefit level. And if, as a society, we're not interested in putting up more money on the table for Social Security, then changing the benefit level is the other option. If we look at the pattern of past sets of Social Security amendments, we'll probably have some of each. We'll probably have some extra revenue to some extent, and we'll probably have some changes in benefit levels. On the extra revenue side, on the bottom of the slide, listed 3 items that are often looked at as sort of a source for potential additional revenue for Social Security. One, of course, is to raise the payroll tax rate to something higher than 12.4. Compared to most European countries, when they hear 12.4, they say, wow, that's incredibly low. In Germany, I think it's something like 2.5 times that size. So it is plausible to have a higher tax rate. Of course, in this day and age, there aren't many people who say, I want to pay more taxes. So that, at least at the moment, isn't a very popular option. Another one, of course, is to raise the taxable maximum. We have 6% of our population that are workers have earnings above $90,000. So generally speaking, we tend to see something like about 94% of the population are okay with the idea of raising the taxable maximum. So it's only that 6% that aren't quite so happy about the possibility. But that's certainly another possibility to raise the taxable maximum. And you can do that either with giving extra benefit credit for the extra earnings or without giving extra benefit credit. And you can approach it either way. Another possibility is we still have about 4% of our workforce who work for state and local governments as state and local government employees, and I won't even try to remember whether Massachusetts is in this category or not, but it is. So about 4% of all the state and local government employees across the country are not covered under Social Security. If we were to sort of change this so that all the newly hired state and local government employees in those places would now be part of Social Security, that would contribute something that would eliminate a little bit over 10% of the 75-year long-range problem for Social Security. Just another possibility. So with those options, let me just sort of leave it with those. There are lots of other possibilities, and as I said, my job here, my instruction from Bing was to sort of try to give you a little bit of a little bit of a look at sort of what we're facing with Social Security, the nature of the financing shortfalls coming up, some of the possibilities on how we'll approach it. And I guess the one further thing that I'd really just sort of want to mention about that in general is really not so much the timing of when we might want to enact changes, because there is advantage to enacting changes relatively soon, the next couple of years, the next several years, whenever, but the actual timing of when the changes would go into effect, when they would actually impact people. In all likelihood, we will not be looking at, most of the proposals we've faced are not proposals that say, let's increase the tax rate a whole lot right now, or reduce benefits a whole lot right now, by way of building up a lot of extra money in the trust funds. Most of the proposals we've looked at have been tailored in a very different way. They've been tailored to really sort of reinforce the notion that Social Security is basically a pay-as-you-go system. And when we have shortfalls that will not be met with current financing, say in 2041, the goal is to sort of make some changes to get either extra revenue or less benefit payments around 2041, to try to sort of target our revenue coming in and our benefit payments to get them in sync roughly on a year-by-year basis. And if we do that going forward, we'll sort of preserve this basically pay-as-you-go nature of Social Security. And what it does mean is when the changes really are needed to go into effect is not for some time into the future. But changes we are quite sure really will be needed. Our estimates are never perfect, and you can be sure that they won't be perfect in this case. But the magnitude of the changes, again, largely because of this change in the fertility rate, the birth rate's dropping down so much, makes it pretty clear that we are going to have financing shortfalls out in the future. And doing something about that will give us all peace of mind, and we'll get our kids and our grandkids away from saying that they're more likely to see flying saucers than they are to see Social Security benefits. That certainly is misinformation that they have received somehow, because Social Security benefits are certainly going to be there in one form or another, at one level or another. But getting the financing back in order so that our trustees' reports won't come out each year saying that there won't be enough money to pay for scheduled benefits would be a great step in that direction. So let me stop there, and I will hope that you will have lots of comments, questions, whatever, just anything and everything. Thank you very much.